Boldwood presents Broken Bones, written by John Carson and read by Angus King. Chapter 1. Edinburgh. He knew the place would have a smell, just not like this. Old and musty. The dust from the shelves flew off with the slightest encouragement. It was cloying, invading his nostrils no matter what he did. Edinburgh had died centuries ago, and with it, its citizens. Then they had started again, bolting right over the top of the old place, leaving behind in its wake a series of tunnels and chambers. This was where Detective Chief Inspector Liam Brodie found himself now, in the underground book depository of the Central Library in the middle of the city. A cavernous space, filled with row after row of ancient books and papers which reeked of another era, of history clawing at his throat. The fluorescent lights above his head lay dormant, switched off to save money, to save the killer from being put in the spotlight. Years ago, Brodie had told somebody, if you think there's a housebreaker in your home, don't switch the lights on. You know your way around your house in the dark. An intruder doesn't. It was clear that this killer thought the same way, except he knew his way around thousands of square feet of what was essentially an ancient warehouse. This space had been built a long time ago, and the walls were made of thick stone. Yet they didn't quite keep out the hum of the traffic moving overhead. Buses hissed as the drivers applied the air brakes. Car horns blasted as impatient drivers tried to get out of the city at the tail end of rush hour, desperate to get home and out of the cold winter chill. This place was where knowledge came to die. Books written and bound by human beings a long time ago, people who'd once thrived in the dirty city that had risen from the ashes of the plague and had killed many less fortunate than themselves. They were left waiting on a shelf, hoping somebody would come along and give them a new life. Liam Brodie wasn't here for that. Somewhere along the long rows of shelves, a killer was waiting for him. Brodie was down here alone, but his team was upstairs, covering every exit with the help of uniformed officers. Alone. The thought unnerved him for a moment, as every tiny sound was like a ghost from the past walking through him, making him shiver. The space was in darkness, save for a light in a far corner, a lamp sitting on a desk. He had been told what to expect, and had been given a brief description of the area, but he hadn't been prepared for the sheer number of shelves and books. His shoes had scuffed on the old stone floor, so he had taken them off and left them at the entrance, something he regretted now as the cold seeped into his feet. It made him silent, though, as he slowly walked towards the light in the far corner, careful not to bump into any of the shelving, disturbing the sleeping tomes. He heard another noise and stopped to listen, pressed between two rows of shelves in the narrow passageway they created. Adrenaline rushed through him, but he had to stay calm. The killer they had been chasing for months had made one fatal error, and rushing now could make him disappear forever, or until the next kill. Brodie was a little over 6'2", and had worked out in the gym in his younger days, bulking up his body, which had come in useful in a few bars when a fight had suddenly broken out, but not so much in here, where the metal shelves seemed to conspire to squeeze the life out of him. Older sections were near the back, where the desk and the lamp were, marking the halfway point between what they had called the modern section and the ancient section. The brick walls gave way to rough-hewn stone as he moved silently towards the light. Then he heard it. The movement of paper, then the sound of a page being ripped out of a book. He turned in that direction, holding his breath for a moment, waiting for the sound to come again. This was where the killer got the pages he'd left on the dead bodies. Most of them, Brodie thought, but not the book he'd bought in the second-hand bookshop, the book that had been his downfall. He started to shiver, wishing that he'd kept his overcoat on, but he'd known the bulky coat might hinder him in a struggle. Down here it was climate-controlled, but still felt chilly. Or it could just be his adrenaline level dropping. Whatever it was, he stayed focused on the light in the corner as he got closer to it. He heard more movement now, a slight shuffle, a rustle of paper again. He brushed up against the metal rack, once again smelling the mustiness of the old books. These passageways were narrower than the main ones, like the one he was heading to now. He didn't realize he was holding his breath at first, but let it out slowly as he tried to look through the shelving, past the books, towards the source of the light. But he couldn't quite make it out. He moved his head sideways, peeking round the corner, putting his weight on his left leg, not wanting to hold onto the shelves. He slowly entered the passageway, watching where he put his feet. There were rows of shelves opposite, filled with musty old books and darkness. The killer stood at the end of the passageway, his back to Brodie. He wasn't a tall man, nor particularly big, but he must have presented an imposing aura to the women he'd killed. He was dressed in black trousers and a white shirt, no jacket. He had dark hair, and his head was tilted down, looking at something. Brodie looked up and saw a convex mirror up high on the wall that marked the end of the depository. There was a cart for pushing books around near the desk with the lamp, and the mirror would be used on the off chance that somebody else was down there. The desk was in this passageway, wider than the one surrounding it. It was a sturdy old desk, its surface cluttered with papers and books. A single lamp cast eerie shadows on the walls. The killer was engrossed in his task, unaware of Brodie's approach. Brodie approached slowly, taking it easy, watching where he put his feet. And still the killer sensed he was there. He looked up into the convex mirror. He was holding a book in his hands. He kept staring into the mirror as Brodie got closer. Maybe 75 feet separated them, and yet he didn't move. Brodie wished he had kept his shoes on as he kept on walking forward. "It's over," he said. Yet it wasn't. The killer dropped the book onto the desk and without looking back, turned left round the corner and ran out of sight. Brodie ran, his shoeless feet silent on the old stone, and was about to shout when he realised that doing so would give his position away. He took his extendable baton out as he turned the corner. A narrower passageway of metal shelves was opposite the wall, the light from the lamp throwing shadows around. There was no sign of the killer in here. The bastard had the advantage. He knew his way around here, had spent many hours down here by all accounts, all in plain sight. Why not? Nobody on the upper levels knew he was a sadistic killer. "You can't get out," Brodie shouted. "The place is surrounded, and the dog handlers will be down here in a few minutes. If you think you can walk out of here, I'll make sure there's a 100-pound German Shepherd hanging off your bollocks." His voice echoed around the huge cavern, into the deepest corners of the subterranean room. No answer. He listened. The silence was absolute. He edged forward, ducking at one point to see if he could look through the shelving to see a pair of legs standing still, or dark hair poking about a rack, but there was nothing. More shelves created passageways, leading to the left, opposite the foundation wall. He kept his shoulder close to the wall in case the killer jumped out. The paint was starting to peel here, as if it hadn't been touched up in many years. It was a dull cream colour, and Brodie wasn't sure if this was intentional or if the years were taking their toll. The light from the lamp was fainter around here, getting dimmer as the shelves got further away. Was the killer running for the doorway as he stood there like a lemon? If so, he wouldn't get far. Brodie couldn't hear running feet, but maybe the killer had done what he had and taken his shoes off. He moved forward as quietly as he could, looking down each passageway, But still, nothing. It seemed even more ancient and musty down at this end, if that was possible. Brodie had been in some dumps in his time, but this place, where books went to die, took the biscuit. He could understand why the killer would want to spend time down here. Nobody else would voluntarily venture into this place. He stopped and stood still, thinking he had heard a noise to his left. Then, nothing. Brodie was about to step forward, his eyes starting to adjust to the darkness again, when he sensed the killer right behind him. Had this aisle been wider, he might have been able to turn faster, but he didn't quite make it before the knife was rammed into his back. Had he not turned at all, the knife could have sliced his spinal cord, but the blade slid in and caught one of his ribs. As the pain screamed through his body, he felt himself being dragged backwards, and a hand grabbing the knife handle and pulling. He knew the darkness was coming for him, could feel his grasp on life letting go. He had underestimated the killer, and now he was paying the price. Brodie thought this was going to be his last day on earth as he reached up in one last futile attempt to try and make the assailant let go, but he was too weak. His mind was exploding with the pain. It was game over. Then he felt the hand let go without touching it. Then he heard shouting as his mind slipped from reality. He reached out and caught himself on a shelf, holding on for dear life, knowing if he fell to the floor he was dead. Another figure was there, a woman. He knew her but couldn't remember her name for a moment. Was she real? He thought so but couldn't be sure. The light was hazy, like seen through morning fuzzy eyes. He wanted to rub his eyes but couldn't remember how. He was closing down. Maybe this woman was an angel. "You bastard!" she shouted, and then clarity came back to him for a moment. DCI Lucy Warren. The killer had turned towards her, advancing in a few steps, but she met him head-on, grappling with him as Brodie clung on to consciousness. They came back towards him, and then Lucy shoved the killer away. Before he could get back to her, she picked up a book and swung it, and despite the aisle being narrow, it connected with the killer's face, breaking his nose. He screamed out, and when his hands covered his face, Lucy kicked him hard in the bollocks. He collapsed in a heap. Brodie collapsed on top of him, just as a rush of boots came thumping up. The last thing Brodie heard was Lucy calling his name. Chapter 2. Edinburgh, 3 years later. Monday. "Are you nervous?" Ruth Campbell asked. Liam Brodie looked down at her face and smiled. "You asked the same thing on this day exactly 1 year ago, and the answer is still the same. I'd rip the bastard's head off if I could." "That's a no, then." She smiled at him. "That's a no." She pulled him closer and hugged him before gently pushing him away and brushing toast crumbs off his tie. "You should eat eggs for breakfast," she said to him. "No carbs." "It's much easier to toss a couple of slices of bread into the toaster." She smiled and shook her head. "Anyway, how are you dealing with all of this?" he asked her. She gave him the same look she had given him the last time he asked her. "I hate having to go and talk to him. I deal with people who have addictions, who are feeling grief taking over their lives, and others who just need somebody to talk to help them get through life. I don't need to be talking to somebody who killed women. However, as a subject, he's fascinating. My boss told me we could learn about human behaviour from Kane, so that's why I go." He put his hands on her shoulders. "My boss wouldn't have asked if he knew you couldn't handle it." "I know, Liam. Gabriel Kane is such a bastard, and I have to let him think he's gaining the upper hand." He dropped his hands. "I told you before, if you want out, then just say the word and I'll tell Cross to shove it." She nodded. Detective Superintendent Rob Cross had spoken with Ruth 3 years ago, when Cain had said he would talk only to her. Quid pro quo, if they ever wanted to get some of Cain's victims back. Meeting after meeting took place, bouncing ideas back and forth, and the chief constable herself had stepped in and told Cross to make it happen. Brodie picked up his coffee from the kitchen countertop and finished what was left. "I have to go and brush my teeth," he said. He went through to the bathroom and took his brush from the glass on the sink. Ruth had slowly started leaving more and more of her things here over the past 3 years, the transition between staying overnight and moving in with him. He started brushing his teeth and looked at the grey hairs starting to appear in his hair. Stress, Ruth had said. He had scoffed at that, telling her that thick hair ran in his family, and he would rather have that than go bald early. It was 3 years to the day since Dr. Gabriel Cain had stabbed him. "I was trying to kill you, Liam," he had said later on. "Nothing personal. I just wanted to escape. And if it wasn't for the help of your DI, I would have achieved it." The man had locked eyes with him when he had spoken the words, a smile playing on his lips, but the depth of the evil in his eyes seemed to go on forever. Cain's stature wasn't what Brodie would have called big, but what he didn't have in size, he more than made up for in cunning and tenacity. The first time Brodie had spoken to him in the psychiatric hospital had been the first time since that night in the book depository. He had wanted to tell Cain, to shout in his face with only inches between them. "If I hadn't moved the way I did, I would have died. You fucking missed. And now I'm still here, breathing God's fresh air, and you're in a cage, going to spend the rest of your life in it." He had kept quiet instead. And of course the cage was a room with a table in it, screwed to the floor. A bed was in one corner of the room, and a table and chair near it, also screwed to the floor. 3 years later, and Cain was in a room that would have put some hotels to shame. He had worked his way up the earning ladder, as it were. He had revealed 2 more bodies, helpless victims, women he had overpowered and strangled before burying them, revealing the first victim's location on the first anniversary of the attack, the next one on the second anniversary. The reveal planned months in advance, but not the destination. Cain had said he would give them back to the family in return for some special considerations, carefully negotiated by the chief executive of the hospital. That's when Brodie had met Ruth for the first time, just after Cain had first been incarcerated. She had been called in to talk with Cain. As a forensic psychiatrist, it had been her job to talk with Cain long before he would be taken out, so he could show where the body was hidden. That was when Brodie had started working with her, although it was DI Lucy Warren who had initially spoken with Cain. Then Cain had demanded that Brodie be brought on board or the whole thing would be called off. The bigwigs had almost pissed themselves, the chief herself saying, and Brodie remembered her face when she had said it in front of him. "Fuck that for a game of soldiers." Then the Minister for Justice had got involved, and suddenly Brodie was a pawn in Cain's little game. He had got to know Ruth Campbell better, little by little, first over a cafe and a coffee on Morningside Road, poring over notes, sharing opinions, Lucy Warren with them at first. But then she had seen what was happening between her boss and the psychiatrist. "I'll leave you two alone," she said one evening, smiling as she got up from the table and leaving. But before she did, a look passed between her and Ruth, a look that said she didn't want to be a third wheel. "You don't have to go," Brodie said. "I'll give you a lift home." "I've my own car, remember? Thanks anyway, boss." Ruth had carried on, poring over the notes as though nothing had happened. Then she had invited him along to her flat for a coffee that tasted better than this place, and it was free. I hate the way Kane thinks he's getting one over on us, Brodie said now.
He has to think that way, remember. If he doesn't, then he might not reveal the location of the next victim.
He'll do it just to have his little day out into the country. Brodie's phone rang. Hello. He listened for a moment. Can you put her off? Ruth didn't hear the other side of the conversation. Right. Tell her no direct contact with Kane. I mean it. Reiterate it or it will be the last time. He nodded a few times. Okay, Lucy. Thanks. He cut the call and put his phone back in his pocket. That was Lucy, if you hadn't guessed already.
I didn't have to guess. You said her name out loud, and I don't have hearing problems?
She smiled at him. That woman from the cable TV news station who writes to Kane asked him if she could tag along today, and now he not only agreed but made it a condition.
We've done so well to keep the press at bay, but it was bound to happen one day.
I told you. He's getting some power back and he's manipulating us. Ruth shook her head.
He's not. I spoke to the reporter. Her name's Catherine Wheeler. I agreed to talk to her.
What? Why didn't you say anything?
It was the clinical director's idea. Kane brought up Catherine's name and Director Lake thought it over and asked me to liaise with Catherine, just to feel her out, as it were.
Have you seen this woman on TV? He asked. She's all smiles and false teeth, but she's like a shark.
She's not. She's very nice.
Just don't go swimming with her.
He looked out of his living room window. His flat was down at Western Harbour in New Haven, one of the blocks of new flats. His place looked out over the water, across the Firth of Forth to Fife. He mentally pictured where his stepson would be geographically, and thought about how he was doing in Kelty. Eric was 27 now, and had multiple sclerosis. He had first come into Brodie's life when he was a toddler, as Brodie started dating his mother, and he had become a stepson the day he married Fiona, and their bond had grown over the years, so much so that he regarded Eric as his son. Now Eric was living with Chrissy in Kelty, near his grandmother, Fiona's mother. The old woman was getting on now, and was happy to see her grandson every day. I'll give Eric a call later, he said out loud, more to himself than to Ruth. He'll like that, she said, picking up her own coffee mug and taking it through to the kitchen. I like it here, she said, coming back into the room. Brodie was still standing looking out over the sea, watching as a plane came in for its final approach to Edinburgh Airport, gliding in over the Forth, lining up with the runway. We should get away for a wee while, he said, as she put her arm around his waist. I'd like that. A little bit of sun and getting burnt in places that don't normally see the light of day. I'm only wearing swim shorts, he said. I don't need to be flaunting my boyish good looks on a foreign beach. True. We wouldn't want there to be an international crisis. I knew you'd understand. He touched the small scar that ran along his chin where a knife had caressed his jaw. A souvenir he always carried with him. A reminder of the first time a psycho with a blade had tried to kill him. When it was still raw, it had made him feel self-conscious, but his late wife Fiona always told him it never made a difference to her. Ruth laughed, and he kissed her on top of her head and she let him go. Come on, let's get up to the hospital, she said. He looked at his watch. There's plenty of time. Let's go and get a free roll first. Chapter 3. Fife. Oh, come on, DS Cameron Reid said as they walked towards the pool car in Fife's HQ. Just a wee wager? DI Art Mackenzie yawned and shook his head. The older he got, the more he thought he wasn't a morning person. Not even 9 o'clock yet. Normal people should still be in bed. That's sick. This is the boss we're talking about. He looked at the younger man disapprovingly. The two of them had wagers on anything they could think of, but DCI Alan McRae was his friend outside of work, as well as their boss. He was also missing. You know what he's like, Hart? Likes a good drink, likes to go out with women, have a good time. Remember that lassie you met last year on holiday? Calling her a lassie is stretching her a bit. Art shivered at the thought of the woman who had the morals of an alley cat. She had been younger than Alan, but what she lacked in years, she more than made up for in experience. Twice divorced with 2 young kids. Fuck trophies, one of the blokes from CID had called them, and a way of skirting the law had just been some of her attributes. But Alan McRae had been bored sitting around watching TV of an evening. He wanted something more out of life, and that something was going to a singles night at the bowling club. What was her name again? Art asked, as Cameron got in behind the wheel. Dawn. Oh, aye, Art said, plonking himself into the passenger seat. He was lucky to escape her. The car door creaked as he slammed it shut. Maybe he's just met Miss Wright, Cameron said. I mean, he's just been in Tenerife for 2 weeks. Holiday romances happen all the time. Like Dawn. Maybe he met somebody else and decided he didn't want to come back to his life. Stop talking shite. Alan wouldn't have gone on holiday and not come back to work. At the very outside, he would have told his sister. Daisy's a basket case. She was crying on the phone to me. Fucking heat case more like, Cameron said. Here, that's enough, Art said, tutting and shaking his head. I mean, he still lived with her, didn't he? He did, but only until he got his own place. Cameron laughed. He got comfortable, you told me. Maybe he overstayed his welcome and she turned him into a human version of Miracle Grow. Don't you go fucking talking like that in front of her, wee bastard. And get this fucking thing moving. I'm already sweating my arse off. Cameron turned the engine on. We've seen lots of weird stuff, boss. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Neither is you getting your fucking jotters. Daisy is good friends with Chief Superintendent Harris. You can explain to him that you were only joking when you're on the carpet. You can laugh all the way to the job centre. Art rolled the window down. You let one go. This car's minging. Have a word with yourself. These cars are bogging. Even a scrapyard would get the bloke thinking this thing was going into its crusher. Cameron looked at the DI. Where to first? Lawyer's office. Supposedly he saw Alan, Art said. They drove from Glenrothes to the small village of Cooper, and Cameron decided to park in the police station car park there. The office was tucked down a side street off the main drag. Cameron parked the car and they approached the office that had once been a shop. In the window hung photos of houses for sale in the surrounding area. Art opened the door that had Duval and Butler WS painted in gold on the glass. A woman sat behind a desk facing them. There was a tall, potted plant over to one side of the window that overlooked the street. Art was no botanist, but he thought it looked sick. Wendy Delgado looked like her hair was blonde and she was just dyeing the roots brown. She looked like she was at the age where she could still run for a train, but there was only a 50-50 chance of her catching it. "Can I help you?" she asked, peering over her glasses. The office was small and had a stale air about it. Out-of-date magazines lay on a table that sat in front of 2 dining chairs in what amounted to a waiting area. "DI Art Mackenzie and DS Cameron Reid," Art said. "You called us about a possible sighting of a man who's listed as a missing person." "That was him through the back. Morris," she replied, looking at them. "Art, huh? Bit of an old-fashioned name for a young man?" Art liked the idea that the woman thought he looked young, even though he was 3 months past his 50th birthday,
but he would have been more impressed if she were 25 with no brown roots. "My dad was a fan of Art Garfunkel," he said, feeling like he had to explain himself.
"Lucky he didn't call you Garfunkel."
Art shrugged. "Well, my mum was a fan of Lulu, so I guess I got off lightly."
"Who was your father a fan of?"
she asked Cameron. "Wicker."
"Liquor, huh? I haven't heard of him, but I'm sure that would have got you a leg up with the cheerleading squad."
"Is he ready now?" Cameron asked, impatience starting to creep into his voice.
"Yes. He's probably stalling, hiding fishy papers or fake account books or maybe even the BB gun he keeps in his top drawer. He thinks I don't know about that gun. But if he ever thinks he's going to bend me over that desk and have his way, the time I'm finished, that desk will be the only drawers that he gets into."
"I don't think you'll have anything to worry about," Art thought, but didn't say. Let the woman have her fantasy before she goes home to her 2 cats. The intercom buzzed on her desk. "Wendy, tell me when Snitch and Snatch are here."
"They are here now, listening to you."
"Oh, shite," he said, his voice sounding further away as if he'd jumped back from the machine. "You were supposed to give me a heads up." Wendy took her finger off the button.
"He'll have me driving the getaway car next. Maybe he should try paying me more than a freckled kid in McDonald's." "You can go through and call him by his first name. That always winds him up."
"Thanks," Art said, opening the door to Maurice Duval's office. He and Cameron walked in. The older man was sitting behind his desk, waving a hand in front of his face. "The landlord doesn't allow smoking in the office, but he hasn't got an ex-wife to look after. The maintenance is killing me, so I have the odd ciggy." "We won't tell if you don't," Art said. Duval was going bald, so he had shaved his hair as close to the skull as it would go without it making him look like an inmate. His belly wasn't as big as it once was, but still had a long way to go. "How can I help you?" he asked, indicating the police officers should sit on the old scabby chairs on the opposite side to him. "Mrs. Delgado called us and told us about your sighting of DCI Liam Brodie." "Oh, yeah. Forgot to ask Wendy to do that. She can't remember to pick up toilet roll when I sent it to the supermarket, but she can remember to call the police about a man who's been missing for a week. I think she's losing the plot."
"I heard that,"
Wendy shouted from the other room. "Yeah, we'll be using strips of newspaper by tomorrow, just so you know." He lowered his voice. "Probably got her ear to the door. Nosy cow," Duval said in a lower voice. "Can you tell us more, Maurice?" "It's pronounced Maurice." Cameron rolled his eyes at Art. "Of course it is." "Can you tell us what you were doing up on the trail?" "You don't have to ask in that tone. Wasn't standing outside a playground with a raincoat on." "Believe it or not, although this is a small town, we do have work to do," Art said. "I was walking my dog. I just happened to look over to the start of the trail and he walked up into the woods."
"Are you sure it was DCI McRae?"
Cameron asked. "Not 100%. I mean, it very well could have been," Duval said. "You got a look at his face," Art said. "Not exactly." "Then what made you think it was McRae?" "Most people who go up that trail are wearing casual gear. Some of them actually wear the proper gear. You know, hiking boots and appropriate clothes. This man was wearing a suit, so he stuck out." "Did you see where he came from? What kind of car he had, Mr. Duval?" Cameron asked. "Maurice. I was in the car park, putting Zeus into the back of the car when I just happened to look over. He was driving a VW Golf, dark blue." "I don't suppose you got the number plate?" Cameron asked. "For what reason?" Duval looked at the younger detective like he was daft. Art had no reason to doubt that Maurice was telling the truth, but he would have got a patrol unit search around the area of the park to see if they could spot Alan's VW Golf. Do you normally walk your dog at lunchtime? If I'm not busy eating lunch at my desk. But sometimes, yes. Nice name for a poodle, Zeus, Art said, pointing to a photo of the dog that sat in a bookcase. She likes to think she's a tough guy. Did you see anybody else walking to the trail after McRae did? Art asked. Duval stared at them for a moment. I never actually saw him walk up to the trail. I just saw him in the car park. There were a few cars there. It was a nice day for hiking. Probably some tourists as well as locals. Art and Cameron asked a few more questions, but Art sensed they weren't going to get any more useful information out of the older man. Well, if there's anything else you can think of, please give us a call at the station, he said. Glenrothes. Oh, I will. There was no conviction in Duval's voice. They all stood up, and the older man shook hands with Art, but Cameron was funky about such practices and passed. Piss fingers, he had once told Art, citing the reason he didn't eat bar nuts. Just one more question, Art said. The name Butler on the window. Where does he work? He doesn't. Not anymore. He's a silent partner. They closed the office door. Wendy Delgado was pretending not to notice them as she played solitaire on her old computer. He's been bumping gums with Mrs. Howard, the femme fatale who owns the cupcake store over on Crossgate, Wendy said, in a low voice. Art looked at her like she'd had a swig of Johnny Walker while they had been in the office. By bumping guns, I take it you mean he had her bent over the desk with his BB gun out? Not his desk, in his car. I'm not sure if the gun came into play. Why do you think he goes to the trail at lunchtime? They find a nice quiet spot in his car and go at it, with Fifi in the front no less. That's animal abuse. I thought it sounded funny. A pedo called Zeus, Cameron said. Are you sure about this? Art asked. Wendy looked at him like she wasn't sure if he meant the dog's name or Duval's illicit affair with the cupcake lady. My friend saw them when she was walking her dog. The windows were steamed up and the car was rocking, so she didn't go knocking. And he drives an old people carrier. Mrs. Howard has no scruples. She looked at Cameron. What car do you drive? A Ford Mondeo. You can sit in the back if you like, but I'd have to handcuff you first. Well then, cheeky chops, if that's how you play, who am I to argue? She grinned at him. Cameron, realising his remark had backfired, took his notice out to cover the red that was slowly creeping up his face. Mrs. Howard, you say? He scribbled the name down. How often does he go there? Art kept his voice equally low. Every day, although at his age, I'm sure the windows don't get steamed up every day. Maybe they played gin rummy or something. He better watch his heart, though. His doc says he needs to cut back on red meat and smoking. If you ask me, I think he's had one too many of Mrs. Howard's cupcakes. Duval, not his doc. You've been very helpful, Mrs. Delgado, Cameron said, putting his notebook away. It hadn't helped to cover his red face. Any time, honey. My husband's long gone, so if you ever fancy going line dancing or something, call me. I'm married, but thanks, Cameron said. She was laughing as they left the office. Jesus, I could flip a burger on my face, Cameron moaned as they walked over to the cupcake shop. She's a live wire, all right, Art said. Let's go and see Mrs. Howard. Hope to God she's not got a mouth on her. Of course she has. She's been bumping gums with Maurice, remember? Cameron made a face as they crossed the street. Chapter 4. Edinburgh. Brodie's mother Isabel owned a little cafe down on Edinburgh shore, a street that ran parallel to the water of Leith, a river that ran out to the sea. It was creatively called Isabel's. She and Brodie's father, Dougal, a retired bus driver, ran the place. Brodie parked his car round the corner, and he and Ruth walked around. It was at the corner of the street, and had some tables and chairs outside. "I'm going to try and eat healthy," Brodie said, as they went inside. "No, you're not. I mean, it's not like your parents serve salads." Ruth smiled and nudged him. "I know. Who am I kidding?" Inside, Isabel beamed a smile at her son. There were a few customers sitting, drinking coffee and eating bacon rolls. "If you're here to help, you're too late," Dougal Brodie said, coming out of the back from the kitchen. "I've already done the dishes." "Damn, I knew we should have come earlier," Brodie said. "Hi, Ruth," Isabel said. "Get yourselves a table and I'll rustle up some rolls and coffee." "Thanks, Ma," Brodie said. "Who are you, Ruth, love?" Dougal said, coming round the corner to give Ruth a peck on the cheek. "He behaving himself?" "Oh, give over," Brodie said. "She's my princess. I take care of her, all right." "That's what I expect to hear, young man." Brodie shook his head. "You'll be telling me to go to my room next." "Don't you knock it, son," Dougal said. "I taught you a valuable lesson." "I waited until he had gone to bed and sneaked out of my bedroom to go drinking with my pals," Brodie said. "That will be all right." Dougal gave his son a mock, stern look. He turned to Ruth. "He probably drank my bloody whiskey too." "I was more of a lager man," Brodie said. "Get yourselves a seat." He watched them sit. "Today's the day, isn't it?" "Aye, we're heading up there after this," Brodie said to Dougal. "That bastard. Just give me 10 minutes and a pair of pliers and he'll tell me where the rest of them are buried." "As much as I'd like to, unfortunately we have laws to think about." Brodie locked eyes with his father for a moment. "The law's a farce, son. I know you have to upload it, but Kane stabbed you and almost killed you. That's something I'll never forget. And if he knows what's good for him, he'll stay locked up." He smiled at Ruth. "Tea as usual?" "Thank you, Dougal." "Coming right up." The older man left and went back through the kitchen door. "He was in the army," Brodie explained, "before he was a bus driver." "I know. You've told me many times." Ruth put a hand on his. "He's just being a protective father. Let him vent." "As long as that's all he's doing." Moira, Brodie's sister, came out with 2 plates with a bacon roll on each. "Hey, sis, what are you doing here? The Western General getting rid of nurses now?" "Always take a week off work around this time, and this year is no different," Moira said. She was 5 years younger than Brodie's 47, and was slim-built with medium-length blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail. "Didn't you go to Spain this time last year?" Ruth asked. "Yes, I did. Didn't fancy going this year. I'm saving money now I'm getting divorced." "Are you sure you and Roger are finished for good?" Brodie asked. "Oh, yes. The skinny bastard was cheating on me. He denied it at first, but then he admitted it. I'm settling into my new flat in Leith Walk and loving every minute of it." "A chance to go out boozing with your pals again," Brodie said, grinning, taking a bite of the roll. "I still went out with him. Roger went to his model railway club. At least I thought it was a model railway club." Dougal came in with 2 mugs, 1 tea, 1 coffee. "Thanks, both of you," Ruth said. She looked at Dougal. "Let me pay for it this time." "Your money's no good here," Dougal said. "I mean it. The last time you tried passing some euros." He chuckled, as Isabel lightly slapped him on the arm. "You're fine, honey. This is on the house. While we still can." Brodie had bitten a chunk out of the roll, then stopped to look at his mother. "What do you mean?" He washed down the soft roll with coffee. "The restaurant next door went under.
There's a new place opening up. We could be next.
Oh, Bill, don't be daft, Dougal said.
It's true. You never know what's round the corner.
Brodie smiled at his mother. Don't be daft, Ma. You'll be fine.
We have a plan B if that ever happens,
she said. And what's that? Brodie asked. We'd sell up and go live in Spain, Dougal said.
That sounds like a plan,
Ruth said. It is, Brodie said. He just said it's plan B. He grinned at her. Ignore him, Ruth, Dougal said. Why don't you sit down? Brodie asked. Thought you said the dishes were done. What's to do, son?
Do you really think that it's going to happen?
Ruth asked, biting into a roll. Edinburgh's changing beyond all recognition. Who knows when they'll put all of this down and start again? He smiled a sad smile. Anyway, I'll call you later. Maybe get a pint one night. Count on it, Dad.
Brodie watched as his father walked back into the kitchen, as strong as he had ever seemed, albeit a little softer around the edges. He was still a hard man, though, with a different sense of right and wrong compared to Brodie. Dougal had once told his son that he could never have joined the police after leaving the army. They had trained him to use all sorts of weapons, taught him how to fight, and he would feel handicapped coming onto Civvy Street and dealing with these bastards who thought they were tough. I have to keep an eye on my customers, Isabel said. Maybe we could get together for our dinner one Saturday, she said, looking hopeful. Of course we will,
Ruth said.
Our treat. I'll keep you to that, she said, and smiled as she went behind the counter. They finished up and left the cafe. The reader sat in the cafe in Sandport Place, directly across from Isabel's. He'd been about to go in when the detective walked up, so he had diverted to the coffee place across the street. He chose a table at the window where he could keep an eye on the front of the other cafe. He had more than enough patience to sit and wait and drink his coffee, reading a newspaper, or at least pretending to. After a while, the man and woman left. The reader would have gone out and bumped into the man, just to see his face up close if he had been alone. The woman posed the problem. DCI Liam Brodie wouldn't recognise him, of course. That would come later. But by then, it would be too late. Chapter 5. Fife. It was obvious that Mrs. Howard didn't sample her own cupcakes if the older woman behind the counter was indeed the proprietor. She was slim, with a pretty face framed by blonde hair. "Help you?" a younger woman said, smiling at them. "Please, we'd like to speak to Mrs. Howard." Art looked at Blondie and saw the smile slip, confirming this was Mrs. Howard indeed. "That's me," Blondie said. The younger woman looked at Art and Cameron. "It is. She really is Mrs. Howard." "I believe you," Art said, shifting his gaze towards Mrs. Howard. "Is there somewhere we could talk in private?" Her cheeks turned a little red and she nodded. "Through the back?" The assistant looked at them all in turn, wondering if she should come through too, but Mrs. Howard looked at her. "Keep an eye on the shop, Francine," she said. Francine looked as if she was going to argue at first, but then thought better of it. Jobs weren't thick on the ground in Cooper, and this was better than sweeping streets. Art wasn't a breakfast person, but the smell of the cupcakes was starting to make him hungry. The door opened, and a woman came in, holding a toddler's hand. "Do you want a cupcake, Joey?" the mother asked. The little boy smiled and nodded and pointed to one of the glass-fronted cabinets. "Yes, Mummy, I'd like to get my high blood sugar level kicked off at an early age," Art imagined the boy saying.